In the darkened corners of Eldraine, where the wilds crept too close to the towns and the night seemed to stretch forever, there was a name that lingered on the lips of the fearful and the bold alike. Syr Imodane, a name that echoed with the clang of steel, the hiss of flames, and the unyielding determination of a woman who had lost much, but never her will to fight. Imodane was no ordinary knight. She was a striking figure, her skin a deep brown, her face etched with scars that gleamed like silver in the dim light of the hearth. Each mark was a story, each line a testament to battles fought and won. Her hair, dark and braided, fell in thick ropes down her back, swaying like the branches of an ancient oak. But it was her arm, an arm made of enchanted wood, pliable and strong as flesh, that drew the most curious gazes. The wood, gifted by the Fae, moved with an unnatural grace, bending and flexing like the muscles it replaced, a reminder of the price she had paid in the war against New Phyrexia. Once she had been a noble knight of Castle Embereth, known for her valor and her fiery spirit. Imodane was a woman who could drink festival wine with the best of them, her laughter loud and infectious, her boasts echoing through the great hall. But the war had changed her. It had taken her arm, yes, but it had also taken something deeper, something more intrinsic. It had taken her sense of belonging. After the invasion, after the fire and the blood, she had left the castle, walking away from the only life she had ever known. It was in the wilderness that she found her new purpose, or perhaps it was the wilderness that found her. The wilds of Eldraine were not kind to those who wandered them without cause, but Imodane was not one to be easily lost. She became a raider, a knight no longer bound by the codes of chivalry or the expectations of the court. She gathered to her side a band of misfits and outcasts, those who had been broken by the war just as she had. They were a motley crew, but under her leadership, they became a force to be reckoned with. They did not pillage for the sake of chaos, nor did they burn for the sheer pleasure of it. No, Imodane's raids were calculated, her targets chosen with care. Villages on the brink of starvation, towns too small to defend themselves. These were the places she claimed, not with fire and blood, but with a promise. She would protect them from the dangers of the wilds, from the monsters that lurked in the shadows, and in return, they would pay her tribute. It was an arrangement that suited both sides, though some whispered that the very raiders she protected them from were her own men in disguise. For 6 months, she ruled from her makeshift throne, a grotesque creation fashioned from the bodies of fallen Phyrexian soldiers. She called herself Queen, and in the eyes of her followers, she was. The townsfolk too grew fond of her, their fear of her fiery temper tempered by gratitude for her protection. They would gather in the village squares, their eyes wide as they watched her ride in on her steed, the massive warhammer strapped to her back glowing with an inner heat. With a flick of her wrist, she could set it alight, the flames dancing along the metal like an old friend. But her rule was not without its challenges. Word of her exploits reached the court, and it was not long before the boy king, Will Kenrith, sought her out. He was young, yes, but not without cunning. He knew that to confront Imodane with an army would be to start a war he was not prepared to finish. Instead, he chose the path of diplomacy, if one could call it that. He proposed a parley, a meeting between the two rulers, and when Imodane, ever prideful, agreed, he challenged her to single combat. The duel was fierce, their swords clashing in a symphony of steel, each blow reverberating through the air like the tolling of a bell. But as they fought, another battle raged, one that neither had anticipated. Will's sister Rowan stood on the sidelines, her face a mask of fury. She had never been one to stand idly by, and as the duel wore on, her anger grew, stoked by the flames of her own power. And then, with a scream that echoed through the mountains, she unleashed that power, cracking the earth beneath them, splitting the mountain asunder. The ground trembled, the sky darkened, and Imodane, sensing the change in the air, knew that the battle was lost. Not to Will, but to the wild magic that threatened to consume them all. She fled into the wilds, her followers scattering like leaves in a storm, the makeshift kingdom she had built crumbling to dust. But the wilds were not a refuge. They were a place of danger, of ancient forces that cared little for the struggles of mortals. It was there, in the depths of the forest, that she encountered Talion, a fey lord as old as the trees themselves. His presence was both comforting and unnerving, his eyes reflecting a wisdom that spanned centuries. He did not speak in riddles, as some of his kind did, but his words carried a weight that made Imodane's heart sink. He tasked her with a mission, one that would test her resolve more than any battle she had fought before. 3 witches, Agatha, Ariette, and Hilda, had unleashed a curse upon the land. The Wicked Slumber, a spell that had left whole villages frozen in time, their inhabitants trapped in a sleep from which they could not wake. Talion needed her to stop them, to end the curse and restore balance to the land. But Imodane was not the hero she had once been. The journey was long, and the weight of her past dragged her down like an anchor. When she finally reached Hilda's ice castle, she found the path barred by forces she could not overcome. The cold bit at her skin, the wind howling in her ears like the cries of the damned. She pressed on, each step heavier than the last, until at last she could go no further. She turned back, her heart heavy with failure. It was then that she fell into the clutches of Agatha, a witch as cruel as she was cunning. Imodane was captured, bound in chains of magic that sapped her strength. She was taken to Agatha's cabin, where the witch prepared a stew, her eyes gleaming with malice as she spoke of the feast to come. But fate had other plans. Kellen, a young knight on his own quest, stumbled upon the cabin. Seeing Imodane's plight, he acted without hesitation, his sword flashing as he struck down the witch and freed the captive knight. Weakened but unbroken, Imodane knew that she could not continue alone. She returned to Will Kenrith, her pride swallowed by the realization that some battles could not be fought alone. She pledged fealty to the boy king, offering her strength in the fight against the witches. Together, they marched on Castle Ardenvale, where the final battle would be fought. It was there, in the shadow of the castle's great walls, that Imodane found her redemption. With fire and steel, she fought her way through the throngs of cursed soldiers, her warhammer burning like the sun. She faced Ariette, the witch who had started it all, and with a final decisive blow, she ended the Wicked Slumber, freeing the land from its icy grip. Syr Imodane, once a knight, once a queen, was now something else entirely. She had walked through fire and emerged on the other side, tempered by the flames. And though the scars she bore would never fade, they were no longer marks of shame, but of strength. She had found her place once more, not in the halls of a castle or on the throne of a fallen kingdom, but in the hearts of those she had saved.